kind of ignoring ignoring the differences between people within a group. Yeah, reminds me a little bit of fascism, that's what I was saying. The other question is about what neurodiversity includes or does not include. So, does it include mental illness? Because some people are saying that it should include mental illness, going so far as to include conditions such as schizophrenia. Very controversial. Presumably OCD should also be included then. So what does it include? You'll find different, because you need to really have some. If it is a group that's aiming for some kind of if it's like an activism group, you need to make it clear who are they including and who are they not including. But there doesn't seem to be any kind of consensus, and different people within a movement will have different views on that. And then there's a contradiction as well. The neurodiversity movement is against the medical model, and yet is it inappropriate then to have a group inclusion defined by a medical diagnosis? I'll come on to that in a moment. There's also a rather dubious implication here that several neurodiversity advocates have said that they are related to other autistic people, that they are somehow linked by familiar neurology. This idea is like one tribe, they're genetically related. Again, because it's very tribal. But is it a familiar neurology? I mean, like I was saying in previous videos, is autism one thing? How do we know it's one thing? I mean, what if it's made up of many different subgroups? My neurology is going to be very different to another autistic person watching this, right? Because no two brains are the same anyway. In actual fact, I mean, this is the case regardless of what condition you have. No two brains are the same, because I've had different experiences that you wouldn't have had. In actual fact, it makes sense to assume that autistic brains are going to be more different to one another, even than maybe so-called neurotypical brains are going to be different to one another, just because autistic development is more idiosyncratic and tends to follow very unique to the individual paths, which means you're going to surely find more variance within the autistic population, within each brain. Because autistics are non-conformists, right? That's surely going to result in a greater degree of difference between the different brains. So, this whole idea of being some similar familiar neurology on one tribe is just completely unscientific. But it makes sense if you are coming at it from a tribal group identity perspective. It doesn't make sense from a sort of neuroscience perspective. It's also rather strange that although the neurodiversity movement claims to be against the medical model, the group does embrace genetic and neuro explanations for autism, a sort of genetic reductionism, while at the same time rejecting genetic research. That is a very basic contradiction you'll find within the neurodiversity movement. On one hand, they reject the medical model, and yet their very language is incredibly medical. It's like, do they want to have their cake and eat it at the same time? Yeah, it's weird. I mean, make up their mind, man. I mean, if they're against the medical model, they shouldn't even be talking about neurotypical, so that's very medical language. The other thing is this neurocentrism. The neurodiversity movement is very neurocentric. They use neurological explanations to explain behaviour. And then they can explain away all sorts of behaviour, saying the person couldn't help it, it's part of their condition, no personal agency here. Again, that's problematic from a philosophical perspective. We won't get into an argument right now all about free will and stuff like that, but that is a contentious argument. Is psychopathy neurodiverse? I mean, technically speaking, if you're being true to the word, yes it is. Psychopathy has been shown to result in differences in brain development. So are we going to say, oh, they can't control it? Yeah, neurodivergent, I should say, neurodivergent to be precise. Oh, they can't help it, they're neurodivergent, you know, they can't control their behaviour. They're not responsible for the fact they've just gone and killed loads of people. They're not going to go to prison there. Can't help it. I don't think anyone would argue that. But technically speaking, psychopathy is neurodiverse. Neurodivergent. So biological reductionism. The neurodiversity movement is full of biological reductionism. The behaviour is attributed to brain differences rather than under the person's control, and yet the same movement claims to be against the medical model. So yeah, they go on about genes. They like this genetic idea. You know, autism's all genetic. They don't like it when you talk about risks for autism. They refuse to acknowledge that events such as prematurity and other intrauterine events could contribute to autism. Again, that's anti-scientific, because most conditions are not caused just by genes. Most conditions are caused by most conditions are interactive. Epigenetics, which means, you know, the way in which the environment influences whether or not certain genes are turned on and off, and this can happen throughout development and throughout life. So really we should be talking about probabilistic causality instead. Nothing causes something else, but instead increases the chances. So if you have certain vulnerability genes and certain adverse events occur, that will increase your chance of having a given condition. There's no inevitability involved. The neurodiversity movement claims that autism is part of normal human variation, which obviously I mean, yeah, that is true on one level, but again, so is cancer. It's part of normal human variation. I mean, most people wouldn't say cancer is a good thing. I mean, this is weird because all conditions, by default of being there, are part of normal human variation. So it doesn't actually add anything. But they use that argument to sort of say that autism is really great, you know, it's not disorder, it's not disability. But if something exists, if a condition exists, and affects humans, it's part of normal human variation, okay? I mean, by default of it occurring in humanity, it's part of normal human variation, isn't it? There's no, you know what I mean? Heart disease, diabetes, all part of normal human variation, but I don't think anyone would think they're good diseases to have. I'm not saying autism is a disease, by the way, I'm just using it as an analogy to say why this is rather unfortunate terminology. The gays say that it follows that then autism, because it's part of normal human variation, that somehow, you know, it's not a disorder, which again is kind of, what's the word for it? It's fallacious reasoning. So at the same time, underpinning their arguments are very biologically grounded models of understanding difference. So neurodiversity movement co-opts part of a medical model. While being critical of it, which, as I've already said, is very contradictory. Oh yeah, I also wanted to say, I said earlier about psychopathy, but also, technically speaking, dementia and Parkinson's are also neurodivergent conditions as well. And part of natural human variation. Are they good? No. One critique by a neurologist is the following. The records that we have at present on neurodiversity are the records of an elite. The only thing they've accomplished is the creation of a split in the autism community that allows for them and nobody else. It's a social club where many of its participants are non-autistic, claiming to be autistic. That's an interesting thing. I think this is the case. It's a sort of TikTok, Twitter kind of thing, where lots of people are now coming out as autistic and haven't even been diagnosed. Some of them might actually be autistic, but there are many of them who actually won't be, because they might have traits, but again, broad autism phenotype, they might not necessarily meet that clinically significant impairment thing. So I do see this happening, and it is quite troubling. particularly if they're kind of like being listened to more than like disabled people. An activist blogger, Hayari, said a public relations campaign emphasises the many positive qualities associated with some presentation of autism: creativity, enhanced empathy. Okay, eye roll. Can't do eye roll. Eye roll. Enhanced empathy? That's news to me. Autism is meant to be a disorder of empathy. But yeah, that's what some of them argue. Probably because they're not autistic. While erasing experiences of the severely disabled, yeah, that's the problem, and that's what I think as well. And also, the other thing is that the main method of mobilisation of the neurodiversity movement inadvertently excludes people unable to make contact with each other. So in other words, by default, you're going to have the most able, most socially connected people being at the forefront of the neurodiversity movement because they have the skills to network and to be able to use computers and other technology to kind of get together. So by default, that means those who are more disabled, socially and executive-wise, are not going to be a major player in the movement. So yeah, it is an exclusive club. So yeah, and then the question then is that, is the neurodiversity movement a political group? If it is a political group, then they are entitled to throw out members who express views contrary to the party line. But that goes against their all-inclusive thing, like the idea that they're all-inclusive and that they include everyone. But they've shown many instances of being extremely exclusive, and anyone who says their autism is a disorder or an impairment, they immediately come down on them like a ton of bricks. So that shows how they're not actually inclusive and it's all words. If you ask me, they are a political not a political party in a true sense. Obviously, you can't vote for them and stuff, but they're behaving more like a political party. So, thank you for watching.